This is a room most visitors to Plainville's new town hall will never see. It's located just outside of the large meeting room where the Board of Selectmen and other town boards make decisions that impact the town's residents. This room, named in honor of Bruce Bumpus, is the conduit for residents to observe their government in action. It's fitting that the room was named in honor of Bumpus weeks before his passing. For decades, he was a one-man band delivering live coverage of Plainville's government from the former Town Hall, Senior Center, and Wood School. Bruce Bumpus was a true Plainville legend.
He graduated from North Attleboro High in 1966, and he was always involved in, he was a Citizens Band radio operator. He had his license. He had a ham radio license. Anything to do with radios, camera equipment, anything electronically for the time frame. He pretty much loved doing all that stuff.
Before he got his ham radio license, he was actually, him and his brother, Paul, founded Triborough React, and they were one of the charter React organizations. And so they did a lot of communications assistance for the police departments and stuff before they had their commercial LMR radio systems and stuff like that. They would use CBs and stuff to help with communications. And so he did that for a long time. He was an avid scanner enthusiast, fire buff, and he was the chairman of the disaster services for the American Red Cross when the Bristol Norfolk chapter was here in North Attleboro, and so he was involved in the Red Cross, React, ham radio. He stayed busy. He was involved a lot with the church, our church as well in the Falls, the Central Congregational Church. So he kept pretty busy.
Bruce was always there for other people. I know he wasn't a member of the Lions Club, but he was sort of like an adjunct member, he and Roberta. And every year when they did the Fall Festival, he was the one who organized all the sports cars and collectibles that came. And everybody came just for that because, they had some fantastic cars there. And he just got such joy out of doing things like that. He really did. He was definitely a giver. Some people are takers and some people are givers, and he was definitely a giver. He was just a fantastic, and of course Roberta was too, because you can't have a husband like that and not share the same, values and everything. But he was an amazing person. I just can't find the words, and that's my job, words, but I can't find the words to adequately describe Bruce.
He loved trains. Him and his brothers had, I'm not sure if they were American Flyer or Lionel, but they had train sets kind of growing up, and I think I think they all liked trains, but I think he was the most enthused with trains. He would go with his friend Bill Holland, and they would go to different places to see trains. He would go to the train expo out at the Big E every year, and walk around. And he collected some train memorabilia. He had a railroad crossing sign outside in the yard that he had gotten. But when he built the garden, the waterfall garden in the backyard, he put, I think it's a G-scale train track around the garden, and he had a lot of different engines and cars and stuff to go around the track. And he would change them out, you know, at Christmas time he had a Christmas train, and you know, he had lots of different engines and cars and stuff to go around the track there.
He would do anything for Plainville, absolutely anything. He and Roberta, if somebody said, we need someone to do this or someone to do that, or we need help with this, he was the first one there. She was too. We were very blessed to have the both of them in our community. They made great contributions to this community.
He did the cable access in Plainville for, I don't know, 30 years at least. And I helped him a lot with a lot of the different things that he did, you know. And I took an interest in sort of doing camera stuff and videography and whatnot as well.
He's done all kinds of school functions when Scott was in school. He's done all the town meetings. He's done some of the Board of Health and Planning Board meetings. He's done other outside activities. He's done things for the Lions Club. He's done things for the police and fire department at different times. Pretty much any kind of a function that was going on in town, that they'd call him at the last minute and off he'd go.
He covered all the town meetings, and it used to be funny when he was in the old town hall, because it was so cramped and he was in the other room and he'd have to keep running back and forth. It was funny.
The meetings were in Joe Fernandes' office at the big table, and then Bruce was in the control room, which was, well, it depends what era we're talking, but it was either right outside that room or in the closet, which was also the data storage room and the control center for the cameras and the kitchenette break area for the staff. So definitely different times compared to where we are now.
You know, the typical setup is I had to move my chair because even the chair and the camera wouldn't fit behind the desk. And, you know, there was the table where the three selectmen met, and I'd sit off at the end. But that was just the routine. And, you know, Bruce would sit there. That was prior to the cameras being affixed to the wall, and he had a little control room.
I remember the first town meeting I was at in 1992, I believe, and seeing this guy scurrying around trying to make sure things were being recorded and could be captured at that time up at the school. And the next thing I know, he's the guy broadcasting it on cable. The next thing I know, he's the guy showing up at a selectmen's meeting or a school committee meeting and pulling all the strings to make sure that the town could be as informed as possible about what was going on. He took that incredibly seriously. He really drove the need, making sure people appreciated why we wanted to do it. He drove the work to get it done. He was the jack of all trades, pulling cables and manning the camera and taking care of the controllers and whatever it took to get it done. He got it done.
For a good part of the time, you know, there really wasn't anybody else. You know, Plainville had a cable access committee, and people would kind of come and go, and there would be people that wanted to be committee members, but nobody really stepped up to say, hey, how do I operate the camera? Or, you know, can you show me how to use the equipment? You know, there was a few people here and there that kind of stepped up every so often, but for the most part, nobody really wanted to everybody wanted something done, you know, whether it was something for, you know, a parade or a festival or the school or whatever. Folks always wanted something done, but nobody really wanted to step up and do it.
He did have his friend Randy Wilhite, who was also on the cable committee, would help him along with my son Scott, like set up for town meetings, either at town hall when they had him here, and then when it moved up to the Wood School on 106. You know, they'd help him set up. Sometimes they'd stay and help him film, but they never actually filmed per se. You know, if Bruce had to check something, they might work the camera for a short period of time.
Bruce Bumpus was an army of one. I mean, there were other people who helped him along the way, and he had some good friends, you know, Randy and Dick Saban, that were there to help him. But ultimately, it always fell on Bruce, whether it was recording the meetings or dealing with the headaches of Comcast, because so often there was a problem with Channel 8 and everybody assumed it was something Bruce was doing because they just didn't know. And really behind the scenes, it wasn't anything he was doing. It was always an issue with the line from Comcast or the cable system. And he had that thankless job of trying to diagnose it and fix it and get it running. And when meetings would start and the Comcast system would fail, it always fell to Bruce. And he never batted an eye. He just kept his chin up and kept working it. And he somehow got it always broadcast and taped. And he did a good job. He really did.
He'd get a little flustered occasionally, but for the most part, I think he handled the situation. If something came up and something wasn't working, I think he pretty much would adapt and overcome. I know occasionally when they built the new wood school and they moved the town meetings to there, he would carry the modulator with him, and there was a beeline at the old wood school. But every so often, the cable company, if they were doing work out on the street or whatever, they'd screw something up with the beeline. And so, he'd get there and set the modulator up and hook it up, and then, we wouldn't have any signal coming out, to the town. And it was quite a project for him to get, especially once like Comcast took it over. It was quite a project to actually get a hold of somebody to try and get the issue resolved. A lot of the direct contacts that he had, didn't work anymore, and he'd still have to call the 800 number, and some people didn't know what a beeline was.
When I started in Plainville in '92, he had been already the long-standing member of the cable committee that broadcast selectmen's meetings.
He was pretty much the chairman right from whenever he started. And he's worked with Rentham Cable, or whatever Rentham Cable is. He's gotten equipment from them at different times as the different cable companies. We went from one cable company to the other to the other.
He also worked with Joe Fernandez to try to get our equipment up to date. And his input made Joe and the selectmen able to negotiate a much better deal.
He was sort of shy to negotiate. And there was two guys, they came in, and we had like 5 or 6 meetings with them, and it was useless. Everything was no, 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 we weren't going to do this. Finally, they gave him like a new camera. So I asked Brucey one day, go home and write out a wish list what you want. Anything you want, I don't care what it is. Well, he came back the following meeting, he had 2 pages. And I mean 2 pages. Tying in the schools, tying in this, tying in that, tying in everything. And it was funny because we just laid it in front of them, and they weren't going to do anything. So, being the big mouth that I am, I said, go home and get your mummy, tell her to come down. And they actually brought a woman in the next meeting that was the head of the whole thing for Comcast for New England. And she was running on a time limit, and she finally gave us everything. It was funny. Brucey just sat there and smiled.
Other communities would try to extract more monetarily, but as you know, that just gets added onto the cable fee that the subscriber pays for. So Bruce was very conscious of that. So he'd try to negotiate as much as he could without affecting cable rates. Bruce was a bit disarming, and he was a non-confrontational person, and I think people that he negotiated with respected that, Plainville did well without affecting cable rates.
Well, he worked every day, even though he was doing chemo. He worked every day, and then he'd do the meetings at night. He never admitted how tired or whatever he was, so it was very hard to get too much out of him. But he was doing what he loved to do, and he was not happy when he couldn't do it anymore. Basically from maybe around the end of September through the end of December. And that's when he started to get really bad.
He pretty much did the cable TV stuff until he couldn't anymore when he got sick, and by that time you know, I didn't live in town anymore. So I didn't really have an opportunity to sort of carry on. But, you know, I think if I still lived in Plainville and whatnot, I think I probably would have.
At the time, of course, we're bringing the new town hall and new public safety building online, and they're beautiful buildings. And we've been blessed with a lot of public servants in town that you'd think, oh wow, we should name, and I can remember some of the conversations, we should name the foyer for, you know, for Rob Rose, or we should do something for the Skinner family, or we should do this for different major contributors throughout Plainville's history. And we took, at the time, we took a very step back. Let's not rush to name anything. Let's remember this is all of Plainville, and it really represents all the people in town. But we looked at this one small room where all the audiovisual control equipment are run through in New Town Hall. And Bruce wasn't well at the time. And we knew we had to tell him how thankful we were for 42 years of public service to Plainville. And it's not just the cable. He worked in civil defense. He worked in emergency management. He spent 15 years as the radio man for Plainville FEMA. A lot of things like that. And those, I think, to a certain extent, always informed and drove his desire to make sure our meetings and our activities were publicized and were communicated out to people. Communication was a huge thing then. And we just felt, you know, there's one exception we're going to make, and that is to name this room for Bruce, and we want to do it in a time and a place where he can see it and he can feel the appreciation and the love of the people of Plainville. Because so much of the time, he's the guy in the background. Well, you know how it is. He's the guy pushing that camera around or plugging in the control unit or whatever, and you take that for granted. And we wanted to make sure that he knew we didn't take him for granted. And so it was very important for us to do it when he could be there and to give him that plaque, even before we could actually physically hang the plaque on that room. But I think about him every time I go in there because, you know, his name's right there. I walk by it and grateful that that's an important part of our building, and the reason it's an important part of our building is because he made it an important part of Plainville, that we communicate out what we're doing.
I think the intention was to do it later, when we were more in the building and we could do something with him there, but you know, unfortunately his health took a turn a little prematurely for that. So we got his plaque made and drawn up, and we were able to get him out one more time to a selectmen's meeting and truly honor him, and it was a great showing, and I believe you have some video of it too, and it was some recognition that he deserved, and he deserved to be there. It shouldn't have been done posthumously. He needed to be there and receive those thanks for all those years of service. Thankless, unpaid service, and I think that the town owed that to him. He didn't ask for it, but we owed it to him, and I'm glad we were able to do that. I think it meant a lot to him too.
He was thrilled as you saw the plaques. He was totally surprised. Justin sent the ambulance for him because he couldn't walk. Well, barely walk, let's put it that way. He was really very shocked at the whole situation. Of course, pleased besides. And of course, he showed him off to everybody that came naturally. A lot of our friends were there. When I found out there was going to be a meeting, I made sure that there were different people there. But he never really talked about it per se, you know. Like I say, he was very thrilled, very happy.
I think that it was fitting that they were that they were gracious enough to do that, you know, because he really did dedicate a lot of time and effort, and he always wanted to make sure that the meetings were covered.
Very, very emotional. He was moved, and we all were moved really by the moment, by having him there with us, and Roberta there, and it was just it was so many times we don't thank people at the right time, and we miss that opportunity. And I'm grateful that we had that chance that evening to share those feelings with him and to make sure he understood what he meant to us, and that his name would always be a part of us and a part of that special role and that purpose that he'd filled for us.
It was all he could do to keep his composure. And of course, he wasn't feeling good at the time either. So that didn't, when you don't feel good, your emotions can get a little more out in the open, you know. But no, he was actually very, very pleased, very, you know, happy about the whole thing.
You know, he was kind of a pillar of the community, you know. He knew the police chief, he knew the fire chief, you know, for a couple generations of each, you know, because he was always at the town hall, he was always there, and, you know, I think there was sort of a mutual respect, you know, even though his position was a volunteer position. I think there was some mutual respect there, you know, and we have family in the fire service in Plainville. My dad's grandfather was a firefighter in Plainville a long time, years and years ago. And then there are still some Skinners. They're not direct relations, but there are still some Skinners on the fire department today. So, you know, there's some family ties there, and, you know, between the knowing everybody and the selectmen, he was very friendly with all the selectmen, you know. Some of them, when he couldn't drive anymore, and it would be town meeting or a selectmen's meeting that he had to tape or what have you, whether it was a selectman or the town administrator, somebody would always offer to either pick him up or bring him home or what have you. So I think, you know, that by having that respect of the people that run the community, you know, that, and Plainville's a small town, you know, as much as it's grown, it's still kind of a small town, you know, and my dad was born in Plainville, raised in North Attleboro, and I think that, you know, when you grow up in a community and when you're around the people that run the community all the time, they kind of become like family, you know? And so I think that it didn't strike me as unusual that the fire department would have sent the ambulance to pick him up, you know? And, you know, even though I didn't stay in Plainville as a firefighter, I was a firefighter in Plainville for a short period of time. So, you know, I think there was maybe some, you know, a little bit of brotherhood there as well, you know, that it was a former firefighter's dad that, you know, needed to go to the town hall.
Bruce was unique in some respects, but the thing I loved about Plainville is there was a real sense of community, and Bruce epitomized that. You know, you're here to talk about his time with spent you know, with the cable committee and videotaping selectmen's meetings and other events. But every contact I had with Bruce was in service to the community. He was a member of the Red Cross, and I remember going to a number of Red Cross meetings with him where, as an offset of that, he was also Plainville's early emergency management director. So if there was a storm threatened where a shelter would possibly have to be set up, Bruce was the contact person for that. Fall Festival, Bruce was also he had a Mustang that he was very proud of, a classic car. He had friends who also were classic car buffs, so Bruce would set that up. Again, Bruce was just a member of the community who wanted to contribute to the community. There was no fanfare about it, just that was his nature. As I said, literally every contact I had with him was in some format of giving to the community. You know, what drives people like that, I'm not sure, but we obviously could use more of it.
You could get the impression from him, though, that he was a little brusque or a little, I got to have this set just the right way, and that's why sometimes people are that way in the domains that they control. But the reality was, he was the sweetest person you could ever meet. And Jen told me he loved candy, and she never understood why he loved candy so much, because he was already so sweet. He just the sweetest person. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and we mentioned in the proclamation that we gave him that night, he drove the filming, the videography around our 75th anniversary celebration, which was a wonderful thing. And we had a big celebration for our 75th, and then he did the same thing for our 80th, and then he did the same thing for our 100th. And so if you look at that span from the 75th to the 80th to the 100th anniversary of this town, he was the key person making sure we were capturing those memories, that we were videoing what needed to be videoed, recording what needed to be recorded, and that, that's a big span of time where he's driving that for the town, and that struck me, those three particular anniversaries.
He just wanted to do good in this life as best he was able. And for me, that's the best epitaph anyone could have.
It's an impact that many people weren't aware of. I mean, if they were to see be it a selectmen's meeting or a town meeting or some other event, they're looking at that and not thinking much about it. But for Bruce, and again, the 23 years I was there, he was the man behind the camera, the man setting up the camera, the man making sure there was a camera, and that's what people who knew Bruce was doing will remember Bruce for, and those people that never knew Bruce, hopefully something like this lets them know that but for Bruce, they wouldn't have seen 99% of what was going on in selectmen's meetings or other town functions that Bruce videotaped. Just a very dedicated person with absolutely no fanfare.
I would say that he was a community member, that he was, a family man, and he was dedicated to whatever it was that he did, whether it was being involved in the church or being involved with the cable access or the Red Cross or the ham radio club. He was dedicated to everything that he did. I think that he enjoyed it.